So when we first released the wolves back in 1987, everything was captive raised. They were adult animals. They were excess to the captive population, meaning they had enough relatives in captivity that we weren't sacrificing any really rare bloodlines if we put these things out and they didn't make it. And their behavior was pretty laughable and sad. A lot of wolves got in trouble. I would say 50 to 80% of them probably died within a year of the first releases because the animals had always relied on people for food, had always been in a pen. They weren't naturally afraid of people at any great distance. I mean, they might have a fear of people, but it was probably within 25 feet when they became fearful because that's what they were raised as, in a pen. And those first releases, they just fell by the wayside. Those animals would have to be recaptured. They were hanging around people's houses. They were getting hit by cars. They were eating roadkill in the middle of the road and didn't know enough to get out of the road when a car was coming and became roadkill themselves. And I think the first really positive, memorable occurrence was one of the pairs of wolves, successfully bred, had a pup. We didn't know it. We suspected they might have had a litter. The adult female died within 6 weeks. She crawled back in her den box inside the pen and lay down and died, which what looked to be a uterine infection. So the male was out with this single pup somewhere. Well, around Christmas time that year, the male was found dead on the side of the road. And the cause of death was he gorged on a raccoon and got the kidney lodged in his trachea, and he suffocated. Natural, if you want to call it, strange, but natural causes. So we always wondered about that puppy. Without both parents, what chances would there have been? But in the area they roamed prior to dying, started picking up sign of an animal. And now it's been through a trapping season. So this is probably spring, and this thing's getting close to 10 months old or something like that. 11 months maybe. And at that point in time, there had been private trapping on the refuge in that part of the refuge that the animal was living in. And it would disappear for a while. I'd see tracks, and then I wouldn't see it for weeks.
Nothing.
Sometimes when I know I'm going after an animal that knows all the stuff about traps, I'll just put the traps in and let them ride most of a week, or wait for a light rain, and then go back and bait them after that. And long story short, I spent many weeks trying to trap it, and it must have already experienced traps because it was impossible to get the animal to come around the trap. You could bait it with food. The animal would come to the food. If there was a trap in the ground, it wouldn't come. It wouldn't show up. And I'd played little games with it, and I'd put some more bait down there, and you'd see the animal come back and maybe come back again, and I'd put a trap in, and the animal would quit coming back. So I'd do it again and get it used to coming back, and then I'd start putting pieces of steel down on the ground, pieces of traps, bolts, a steel plate, one of the jaws, and I'd sort of just lay it around there, partly under the dirt and partly exposed.
Well, no sign today, huh?
Doesn't look like anything fresh. There's a lot of junk laying around out there anyway. It used to all be logged off, so there's old logging equipment and cables, buried in the dirt, and old tires probably in places, and oil spills and everything else that happens if you've got a commercial logging operation for years.
I don't think these loggers are big on recycling.
So I knew the animal wasn't that afraid of anything human related. And over a couple of weeks, it seemed to get over the chunks of steel in the ground. And I finally went and put a trap back under it and caught that animal. And she went on to, I think live 8 or 9 years, move a little bit to the south and reproduce a lot. And I think quite a few of her offspring are probably still, or descendants are still around in the population today. But that point in the program was really a change in that prior to, the animals seemed to have, like I said, a 20% chance of surviving. As soon as there was a wild litter born, the population started changing to wild born versus born in a pen. Their behavior changed, and the survivorship went way up on everything. People didn't see them as much. They didn't come around houses. They didn't get hit by cars as much. And it seemed like the population really took off at that point. I think that was the strongest initial, really positive aspect of the program. I can remember that, okay, this thing could work. It might work. It's just going to take a lot of work on our part and patience and stick with it.